Welcome back, everyone, to Deep Links. Today's episode is one of those what-if scenarios that'll make you question everything you know about apocalyptic fiction. We're talking about reimagining the iconic Metro Trilogy, which was originally set in Moscow, and transporting it to New York City's subway system. But that's not all. This isn't just a change of scenery. In this version, we've got World War III, nuclear devastation, factions of woke zombies, Confederate survivors, and bandit gangs of illegal immigrants. It's a roller coaster, and we're about to dive in. For the uninitiated, the original Metro Trilogy follows the life of Artyom, a Russian survivor who battles mutants, fascists, and communists in the depths of Moscow's metro system after a nuclear apocalypse. But today, our protagonist isn't Artyom. No, we've got Joe, your average New Yorker turned post-apocalyptic hero. And the stakes are just as high, if not higher. Setting the stage. World War III and the nuclear apocalypse. The world was teetering on the edge for years. Global tensions, trade wars, cyber attacks, and a political landscape that seemed to be on the verge of imploding. But no one, not even the most paranoid prepper, thought it would actually happen. World War III kicks off with the launch of nuclear weapons by the United States against Russia. Moscow is the first city to be obliterated, along with several major military targets. But Russia isn't going down without a fight. They retaliate with a massive nuclear strike on the U.S., targeting cities like Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and, of course, New York City. The Big Apple, the city that never sleeps, becomes a smoldering ruin in a matter of minutes. Thousands are vaporized in the initial blasts, skyscrapers fall, and the iconic landmarks of New York are reduced to ash and rubble. Those lucky, or perhaps unlucky, enough to survive flee into the sprawling network of subway tunnels that crisscross beneath the city. The NYC metro system becomes their sanctuary, their prison, and their battlefield, all rolled into one. But the Russians weren't just satisfied with turning New York into a wasteland. No, they had one more ace up their sleeve. In addition to the nukes, they unleashed a biological weapon that targeted the brains of low IQ individuals. The weapon was designed to scramble cognitive functions, turning those with the lowest mental capacity into mindless, rage-filled zombies. The result? What's left of New York is now filled with mutants, psychotic SJWs, and even some literal woke zombies that can't let go of their Twitter rants about social justice while trying to bite your face off. Joe's beginnings in a shattered world. Joe, our protagonist, was just your average New Yorker before the bombs fell. He worked a 9-to-5 job in Manhattan, caught the F train every morning, and spent his weekends complaining about the rent being too high. But all that changed in the blink of an eye when the nukes hit. In the chaos that followed, Joe fled underground with the rest of the survivors. He ended up in the Atlantic Avenue Barclays Center station, one of the largest and most fortified stations in the Brooklyn sector. Joe's life has been a struggle for survival ever since. Supplies are scarce, mutants roam the tunnels, and the factions that have sprung up in the subway are constantly at each other's throats. But Joe's station has held on. It's one of the few places in the subway system that's relatively safe. There's an uneasy truce between the different survivor groups, and people are doing what they can to maintain some semblance of normality. That all changes when Joe meets a mysterious ranger, a lone warrior who travels the tunnels, hunting mutants and scavenging for supplies. This ranger tells Joe about a new, even more dangerous threat that's emerging in the tunnels. The biological weapon the Russians deployed is starting to mutate further, and these mutations are getting smarter, more aggressive, and deadlier. The ranger tasks Joe with delivering a message to the leaders of the normal United States faction over at Grand Central Terminal. The future of what's left of New York depends on it. The factions of NYC's subway. Much like in the original Metro series, the survivors in New York's subway system have split into different factions, each with its own ideology, resources, and goals. But in this version, these factions are uniquely American, reflecting the fractured political and social landscape of pre-apocalypse America. 1. The normal United States. This is the largest and most organized faction, made up of survivors who still believe in the values of pre-apocalyptic America. They operate out of the largest subway stations in Manhattan, Grand Central, Penn Station, and Union Square. Their goal is simple: survive, rebuild, and eventually retake the surface. They maintain a strict military hierarchy and have access to some of the last remaining weapons and technology. They represent what's left of the U.S. government and military, though their authority is tenuous at best. They're constantly trying to maintain order in the face of chaos, which isn't easy when you've got woke zombies, Confederate factions, and bandit gangs running wild in the tunnels. But they hold on to hope, and their leadership believes that with enough time and manpower, they can reclaim the city and rebuild a new America. To the SJWs and the woke zombies. And then, we've got the SJWs pre-apocalypse. They were the ones screaming about social justice and microaggressions on Twitter. Post-apocalypse? Well, things didn't get any better for them. When the Russians unleashed their biological weapon, it specifically targeted low-IQ individuals, turning them into mindless zombies. Unfortunately, that included a lot of SJWs. Now, these woke zombies roam the tunnels, still ranting about privilege and safe spaces even as they try to rip your throat out. It's a terrifying and hilarious sight all at once. Imagine a Karen trying to eat your face while screaming that she wants to speak to the manager of the apocalypse. But not all SJWs got zombified. Some of them survived and formed their own faction, holed up in the safer parts of the subway system. They've established safe spaces where they hoard resources, preach about equity, and generally refuse to acknowledge the harsh realities of the world around them. Needless to say, they're not very popular with the other factions. 3. The Confederates. Down in the deep parts of the subway, especially in stations like the Staten Island Ferry Terminal and parts of the Southern Brooklyn lines, we have the Confederates. These guys are organized, disciplined, and ruthless. They run their operations like a military unit, complete with strict rules and harsh punishments for anyone who steps out of line. They've even managed to rebuild some basic industry, using captured bandits as laborers in their underground factories. While their ideology might rub some people the wrong way, there's no denying that the Confederates know how to survive. They've made it clear that they're willing to work with other factions when necessary, but they aren't afraid to take what they need by force. In fact, the Confederates have a bit of a rivalry with the illegal immigrant bandits, regularly raiding their camps for supplies and new workers. 4. The illegal immigrant bandits. If you thought life in the subway was chaotic, wait until you hear about the illegal immigrant faction. These guys are more like a loose collection of bandit gangs than an actual faction. They control a few stations, mostly in the outer boroughs, but they're constantly fighting each other just as much as they're fighting the other factions. The bandit mentality has taken over completely in these groups. There's no order, no discipline, and no long-term strategy. They raid, steal, and kill with reckless abandon, but they rarely win any real victories. Whenever they go up against a more organized faction, like the Confederates or the normal U.S., they get absolutely wrecked. It's like sending a group of toddlers to fight a Navy SEAL team. The radio jammer station and the Secret Service's plan. As Joe makes his way through the tunnels, completing his mission and gathering allies along the way, he stumbles upon something strange. Deep in the heart of the subway system, hidden beneath an old abandoned station, he finds a heavily fortified bunker. Inside, he discovers a secret radio jamming station, still operational after all these years. It turns out, before the bombs fell, the U.S. Secret Service set up these jamming stations to block all outgoing communications. Why? To prevent the Russians from using any remaining signals to guide their nukes or stage additional attacks. The Secret Service knew that if any kind of communication got out, the Russians might figure out that some parts of the country were still functioning and launch follow-up strikes. Joe realizes that this station is the reason why no one in the subway has been able to make contact with the outside world. All signals, both incoming and outgoing, have been jammed for years. With this knowledge, Joe has a difficult decision to make. Should he deactivate the jammer and try to reach out to survivors in other parts of the country, risking another Russian attack? Or should he leave it on and continue living in isolation, hoping that the Russians don't strike again? Exploration of Texas and the Confederate-Mexican War. As Joe's journey continues, he and a small group of allies manage to secure a working train and make their way out of the New York subway system. Their destination? Texas. They've heard rumors that the effects of the nuclear war have subsided in some parts of the country and that people are starting to rebuild on the surface. When they arrive in Texas, they find that the rumors are true, at least partially. The Confederates have established a stronghold in Texas, controlling large parts of the state, and even building a wall along the Mexican border. They've managed to rebuild some semblance of civilization, complete with farms, factories, and even a basic government. But all is not well in the Lone Star State. The Confederates are locked in a brutal war with the remaining illegal immigrant factions, who have banded together into a massive army. These bandits, armed with whatever weapons they could scavenge, have been launching constant attacks on the Confederate strongholds, trying to break through the wall and take over Texas. The conflict is brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses. The Confederates have the upper hand in terms of technology and discipline, but the illegal immigrants have sheer numbers on their side. It's a bloody stalemate, with no end in sight. Joe and his allies get caught up in the conflict, forced to choose sides. In the end, they decide to help the Confederates, seeing them as the lesser of two evils. After a series of brutal battles, Joe and his group manage to help the Confederates push back the illegal immigrants and secure the wall. But the victory comes at a cost. Many of Joe's friends are killed in the fighting, and Joe himself is left questioning whether the war was even worth it. A new beginning? By the end of the story, Joe has seen it all. Nuclear devastation, mutant zombies, political factions at each other's throats, and endless conflict. He's lost friends, made enemies, and witnessed the worst of humanity. But he's also seen hope. The Confederates and the normal U.S. forces, once bitter rivals, have started to work together. They've even begun sending expeditions out into the rest of the country, exploring what's left of America and searching for other survivors. As Joe stands on the surface of Texas, looking out at the vast, barren landscape, he realizes that the future of America is still unwritten. There's a chance, no matter how slim, that humanity can rebuild. It won't be easy, and the scars of the war will never fully heal. But as long as there are people like Joe who refuse to give up, there's hope. But for now, the war rages on. The fight for survival in the tunnels continues. And Joe, the unlikely hero of this post-apocalyptic nightmare, knows that his journey is far from over. That wraps up today's episode. If you enjoyed this insane, twisted take on the Metro series, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more what-if scenarios like this one. And remember, when the woke zombies come for you, make sure you've got a redneck nearby to watch your back. Peace out.